Life is not about the pursuit of creature comforts and taking the path of least resistance. It's about love, which can be defined as willing to lay down our lives for others and leaving the comfort of the Shire, our own space and comfort zone, and embracing the many crosses, sufferings that the adventure life places in our path, and in giving ourselves willingly in the service of others, we grow in virtue, which is the only growth in stature that truly matters. Cool. Clifford, we're back for another one. Oh, the penultimate chapter of The Hobbit.
I know. I have to say, I thought the last one was the penultimate one, but in classic Tolkien fashion, we have penultimate chapters.
Yeah. That's happening. All right, so for this one, a lot happened. Another short chapter, but a lot happened. Well, we'll talk about the kind of like how these later chapters were written compared to the earlier ones, because if you're reading along with us, maybe you've noticed kind of a difference, at the very least in the length of these chapters. They're all much quicker, just kind of blow by blow at some points.
Right.
We'll talk about the battle that happened, the rest of the battle that Bilbo didn't see because he was knocked out by a rock. We'll talk about Thorin's redemption or possibly atonement. We'll talk about all the goodbyes that happened. And we'll take another step on the hero's journey. But before all that, take it away, Clifford.
Cool. So, we come to the beginning of the chapter. Bilbo, who was knocked out by a rock, as Patrick mentioned at the end of the last chapter, wakes up in a daze. He sees elves in the valley below, but hears no songs of victory. A final search for him, before he's presumed dead, discovers Bilbo. He kept the ring on his finger during the whole battle, so he's been invisible the whole time. Upon returning to the camp, many are wounded, but Gandalf is pleased to see him. Gandalf leads Bilbo into the royal tent, where Thorin is on his deathbed. Thorin thanks Bilbo for everything and revokes his harsh words from 2 chapters back. Bilbo is grateful and moved to tears as Thorin dies. On his deathbed, Thorin decides he has no need for treasure. He is buried with the Arkenstone. Dain becomes king under the mountain and turns over 1/14 of the treasure to Bard as promised. This turns out to be wealth beyond belief anyways. Bilbo learns of the remainder of the battle. The eagles flew down from the north, wary of the goblins gathering below. They help the elves, dwarves, and men regroup, but they remain outnumbered. Bjorn, in the form of a giant raging bear, arrives and tears a line through the goblin army, destroying Bolg, their king, with his claws. The goblins begin to flee and are pursued through the forest and swamps in all directions. The good guys have suffered heavy losses, but the goblins are almost wiped out in this part of the world. Bilbo and Gandalf finally set off towards home. The remaining dwarves give Bilbo his share of the treasure, but he accepts only 2 small chests of silver and gold. They depart with the Elven King of the forest at the edge of Mirkwood, where Bilbo expresses his gratitude with a gift for the king. They, being Gandalf and Bilbo, continue around Mirkwood with Bjorn, stopping at Bjorn's estate for a long Christmas holiday. The journey is long and tricky, but Gandalf and Bjorn offer good protection, and with goblins and wolves mostly gone, it is a safer and less treacherous journey than the way to the Lonely Mountain.
Did you mention Christmas in there?
I did, indeed.
Really? Do you really think they celebrated Christmas?
They mentioned Yule, a Yule holiday, and I assumed, maybe perhaps mistakenly, I put the two together in my head. Yule basically is synonymous with Christmas these days.
So Tolkien has, I think it's more like the New Year for Tolkien, and I don't know if is Yule really Christmassy? But anyways,
Well,
I think it's more New Year's for Tolkien. Like that's the
after you challenged me on this, I did a little research. In the Scandinavian languages, to back up my original assumption, Yule means Christmas, or the word for Yule means Christmas in modern language. Yule was basically an older Germanic tradition, like a pagan festival that was celebrated for a very long time, and once Christianity came along, parts of Yule were adopted into Christmas. So they've become associated, and there's certain things that are left over, like the Yule log and Yuletide, what have you. That's mistaken. Yuletide literally just means Yule time. Point being, I was wrong. I should not have said Christmas. But similar time of the year.
Well, yeah, but they definitely don't. So Middle Earth is set as a pre-Christian world. It's kind of outside of time, but we know it's before Christianity would have arrived at this part of the world or whatnot. Anyways, but just to not to bring up an old topic of a certain Dwarves New Year Day. If we look at this, it said this was at midwinter, whereas our New Year's is December 31st is pretty close to the winter solstice, which is really the beginning of winter.
Right.
But if they're saying it's midwinter, and we think winter is 90 days, so if we cut midwinter, so if we cut that in half to 45 days, and we go 45 days before December 31st for our reckoning, then that would put us at mid-November. And so then the month before that, it's possible to have the first new moon, the first new moon of fall, or the first new moon of the first last moon of fall, right?
You trying to talk about Durin's Day?
Yeah. Anyways,
I believe it was the first day of the last moon of autumn.
Right. So that could potentially fit in the whole from mid-October to mid-November, according to this calendar. I think based off that the Yule is in the middle of winter as opposed to the beginning of the winter. Here,
So what are you getting at? You've confused me a little bit. You're saying that our original estimate... Okay.
Yeah, Tolkien had said Durin's Day was October 15th, which we were like, well, that's too early. Or October 19th, 15th, one of the two. And we just said, well, that's too early. That doesn't make any sense for anything that we came up with. But we were kind of working with winter being on the first, like where our New Year's or solstice is, which is... That's kind of our beginning of winter, really, or technical beginning of winter. It already feels like winter by that point, but it's not technically winter until then. Whereas this is kind of saying it's maybe past it. So possibly this would fit under that.
So what you're telling me is that Tolkien saying that Durin's Day was mid to late October makes sense.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. All right, but anyways, let's just keep moving on. We don't have to bring that thing up again. We've already struggled with that for like two episodes already. This is like 2.5 now.
I think we solved it. I don't want to suggest to people like we don't know what we're talking about. Point being,
whatever.
Okay, so
right.
let's jump into this.
Okay.
So this chapter, there was a ton of exposition. We had so many loose ends to tie up, and they got tied up really quickly. Was this intentional? Is this characteristic of Tolkien at all to bring the tale to an end so quickly?
All right, so we said that we would talk about this in the last episode because, like the earlier chapters was of the journey there. It's like, well, first of all, okay, the landscape was changing because we were in a different place, all new place every time. But it just seemed like it was more detailed and more descriptive, and there was more cool little Tolkien touches, like details and everything. And personally, I don't know. I feel like those kind of faded once we got towards the Lonely Mountain. Now, maybe that's because the landscape's barren, but...
I also thought those earlier chapters functioned like stories in and of themselves.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Each one could be pulled out as a little story.
Right, and so what I'm thinking is this had to do with how he actually wrote it originally. So, First of all, we got to remember, and we said this at the beginning of the series, that the Hobbit could have. It was just one of the many stories that he was telling his kids. It wasn't really related to his whole huge, epic Silmarillion mythology that was already in the works at this point. But he just kept making a couple references to it that it kind of just got dragged in eventually, and then. Yeah, then they wanted the sequel, which is Lord of the Rings, but we'll get to that later. So anyways, though, he basically was writing this to his sons, and
how old are they at this point?
Well, varying ages, but they're kind of in their early teens. Or no, not early. Well, right before their teens. So 10, 12 range is kind of when they're coming up through that. When he's writing or telling these, and he would kind of write it down maybe, and then tell his kids for their winter reads, which I guess just on like a Saturday afternoon or something in the winter, they would just sit down when it was too cold outside to play. I think that's my imagining there. But anyways, in the works with the story the whole time, and he basically gets up to Smaug, has to figure out how to kill Smaug. And, he had thought of having Bilbo just sneak up and stab him, but he's like, that wouldn't work. Doesn't work with Bilbo, not a glorious death for Smaug. So forget that. Right. So he went with the Bard ending, and then after that, he basically just stopped writing. And at that point, the boys were growing up, so there wasn't...
Well, so hold on. Not to dwell on this too much, but that actually makes a lot of sense, because we were saying at the time, we kind of felt like the whole book was leading up to the death of Smaug. Like, it felt like it should be the climax of the story, but then we kept going.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we did.
So that actually makes a lot of sense in terms of how he was putting it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and again, this all just this makes sense why these later chapters are just pretty quick blow by blow. Personally, I don't think there's as much detail as there was at the beginning with these things.
Well, so I cut you off. So the kids are growing up.
Yes.
Tolkien stopped writing this for a chunk.
Yeah, so part of the reason he stopped writing this is the sons were too old that it's just like, well, what's the point of finishing this? Because I was just writing this to entertain them, and they're too old for it. So, anyways,
too cool for that, Dad.
Well, at least one of the sons isn't, because one of the sons is the primary critic for Lord of the Rings, which we will get in depth into eventually. Okay. But anyways, apparently somehow there was a graduate pupil of his named Elaine Griffith. Somehow she was a student, but then she became a family friend. Anyway, somehow she read the project, and then she had an advisor or overseer who was named Susan Dagnall, who worked for Allen and Unwin Publishing. And so Elaine told Susan that this Tolkien guy had this really good story that could, potentially be a book for this Allen and Unwin company. Right. So Susan contacted Tolkien and wanted to read it. She reads the script and she says, oh yeah, this is totally potential to get published, like this Hobbit story. Just write an ending to it, and if you could do it quick, that'd be great. So he finished the last couple chapters within a year. So
was Tolkien oh hell yeah, I would love to have this published, or did he have any hesitation, or he kind of jumped on it?
He, I don't.
Or we don't really know.
We don't really know, but I think I would guess sure, why not?
I know you'd mentioned before that you were struggling for money at certain points. Was money a thought at all?
Well, it's not like he was struggling. It's just he had to work his butt off to pay all the bills and make sure that he's set. So I mean, a book publishing a book and making some money off it, why wouldn't you take that? The book's already almost written. I just got to finish it up. Why would I not do this deal? Plus, if other people would like it, it's all right, sure, I'll spread this to other kids to enjoy besides just my own kids and a few others from the neighborhood or whatnot who have read it. So, yeah. He got it done by October 1936, and then eventually it was published a year later in 1937.
Okay. So the point being, part of the reason we have this rapid acceleration of the plot and then things winding down really quickly is because of the speed at which Tolkien was putting it together.
Yeah, he could have probably wrapped it up more if he had just ended it with the death of Smaug, because that's what we thought would be the climax, but he let it take a twist, and maybe for the better. I mean, yeah, right. I mean, because you can't really just end it there when the main characters didn't kill him or whatnot. Maybe that's why he thought like, oh well, I guess the story has to keep going because our main characters didn't kill the dragon, so we need something that they're involved. I don't know, maybe.
I also think this like theme that we've talked about quite a bit of the modern story versus the ancient epic. Ending with the death of the Smaug feels like the way that an ancient epic might end. Like, the official bad guy is dead. Everybody had, like, the good guys have the treasure now. Everything is resolved. Yeah. Whereas this, like, sort of political rivalry between dwarves and elves and Thorin's personal corruption and Bilbo's seeming... Like, all of this stuff is a lot more nuanced and, frankly, more modern. And maybe is important to take the story to a different level.
Yeah, and I mean the characters weren't done too. I mean, yeah, like what you're saying, like the old epic story. Sure, they just end it. Whoever owes whoever.
Glory has been achieved.
Yeah, but like Thorin's well, yeah, Thorin's not, so we can't end it there. And the dwarves haven't proven themselves to be brave, and Bilbo,
right.
Yeah. So, anyways, though, I think let's just move on though, because I don't.
Yeah. So speaking of the loose ends that get wrapped up, we'll run through some questions about the battle.
Yeah, we're going to do the battle first here. Yeah.
What do you make of the end of it? As I mentioned, the Eagles come to their aid again, but this is not a complete resolution for the good guys. Bjorn ultimately arrives, and he's like the real wild card in the situation. Yeah, what were your thoughts?
I mean, I liked it. I liked Bjorn. It's fun. I mean, he's really dragging in just about every single character we've met in this book.
Yeah, I was curious.
East of the Misty Mountains, that is, because we haven't seen Elrond and Gollum again. But yeah, everybody else has come back.
Okay. Personally, I liked it too. I thought it was pretty cool. And I was also satisfied that the Eagles weren't like a perfect panacea. Because it would have felt a little bit incomplete if it was just like, oh, Bilbo passes out, the Eagles show up, and then everything is perfectly resolved.
Yeah.
What did you see like a broader significance in bringing in these other characters, or the way the battle played out at all?
I mean, we already talked about the catastrophe stuff in the last episode. So, I mean, that's...
This sort of twist for the good.
Yeah, so that's kind of... I mean, that's the major thing here with the Eagles, and then Bjorn is just more icing on the cake for that, I think. I thought it was kind of interesting how much carnage there was in the battle, and they also talked about even how a bunch of the elves and some of the Eagles went out, and they were hunting down the people that were the goblins that were running away, So,
yeah, that would seem... I mean, it's a logical detail, but it seemed pretty brutal, like a real like take no prisoners type thing.
And same, well, it might have just been to protect the land, make sure the lands were cleared out. And
yeah, certainly.
Yeah, but then I also thought like the only people that were left were just any of the wounded, which included Gandalf, in a sling. I mean, wow. Yeah,
must have gotten up to some bad business. Does this feel like a lasting peace? Are the goblins truly defeated?
This seems like a big blow for the goblins. It seems like this is peace for maybe a generation or at least a couple decades. I mean, because the goblins cleared out the Misty Mountains and then that mountain range in the north to really come at them. I forgot to mention this in the last chapter, but when the goblins had heard that Smaug died, it was saying that they cheered because, well, first of all, they cheered that Smaug died. So Smaug was an evil character, and the goblins are evil characters. But they cheered at the death of another evil character, maybe because they thought they could get the wealth or whatnot. But they were happy that Smaug was gone. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, that's a interesting opposition. For me, that sort of contributes to this like general sense of complexity, kind of like we were just mentioning a minute ago. Where this is bigger than like the hero destroys the dragon and like good has vanquished evil, period. The story is complete. This is like there's way more way more politics going on. Like the bad guys don't necessarily get along with all the bad guys. The good guys don't get along with all the good guys.
I think it's more of. I think it's more like what we were saying about how dragons aren't the ultimate source of evil.
Okay.
And
you think the goblins are much more evil than the dragon?
Well, I wouldn't even say that, but I would say the dragon is kind of just the rogue agent, and obviously he's more towards the evil side, and he'll help the evil forces if it suits him. But
right.
I mean, the dragons aren't. Their death isn't the end all be all. It's not like evil's vanquished forever. But if they die and all these goblins are defeated, there's clearly like a spring comes about. I'd say.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I was curious on this note. Does Tolkien suggest any sort of good evil balance throughout his stories or throughout history that he talked about? Because one way of looking at this, I could imagine is vanquishing the goblins is a great thing and peace has come over the land, but it might also create a power imbalance that leads to bigger problems down the road.
All right, so we'll touch on this really quick, but I haven't thought this through enough to really make a good discussion about it. But Tolkien viewed history as one huge long defeat, and there's points where you can get victory for a while, and then eventually there will be like one ultimate victory at the end of time. But you can kind of just get small victories along the way and push off, or I don't know about push off or.
You can't stave off the progression of time slowly destroying things.
Well, there's certain points where you can come about and get like a good victory for a while, and I feel like that's what this one is.
Okay, interesting. That is it's not what I expected for a view on history. Like it's a bit more negative than I anticipated.
Yeah, that is pretty pessimistic of him. We'll have to dive into that later, but I'm not prepared to comment on that enough yet.
Okay.
Anyways, with this one in particular, though, I would say this brought all the good guys of the area together, and
true.
And they share the treasure enough.
Well, that might be exactly why I'm asking the question. To be the devil's advocate, there is like that's a case for this good evil balance. Is that because if you have these forces of good who are infeuding and everything. Balancing them out with the evil forces of the goblins makes all the good guys get along, and they're unified in their resistance against the goblins, against the forces of evil. But as soon as we lose this enemy, basically, then just naturally, like you can't have this. You have an imbalance of power, so suddenly, by default, you're going to have infeuding and conflict within whoever's left over.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's going to happen here, because that was already happening before. This was the force that brought them together, and afterwards, they fought together in battle. They don't want to turn on each other now. Like they all recognize like there was a more evil force out there. We all came up together to defeat it. We had a great like generational victory here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we know that the goblin kind of evil is still out there. And so that's the bigger threat. Plus, now we made it. No. But now they share the treasure, and so there's no real reason for like any sort of rivalry or resentment anymore, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, I have some more thoughts on that later. But that view on it assumes you have dynamic characters who are kind of learning from the situation. They're becoming wiser because of this battle. And they're saying, you know what? We were wrong to be fighting before. Now's the time to come together, right?
Well, yeah.
Because if they were unchanged by the battle, if they're like, okay, now's the time to fight, fighting ends, and their mindset hasn't changed at all, they're going to go back to fighting with each other.
Yeah, but their mindset changed with one major character who we'll talk about in a second. I think one major character proved that everybody's mindset kind of changed. But anyways, just to note here too, do I want to actually note this?
Do you?
Well, yeah, I mean, notable in this battle also was just the courage of the dwarves, who kind of up to this point had not proved very courageous at all in any way. I mean,
okay,
Thorin for a lot of the book had talked like really heroically and epically, but when it came down to the crunch time, Bilbo was doing everything for him. But here, he proved himself in the battle. As well, we should also mention Keely and Feely, his nephews, bravely died defending Thorin. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. And all the other dwarves were fighting as well, so I think that's important to mention here. I think we should get into the main character.
Okay, on that note, Thorin dies in front of Bilbo's eyes, which was quite a surprise for me. Do you think this makes Thorin a hero in the end? Does his death redeem him at all? Should it?
I think it definitely redeems him. I think there's kind of... I don't know if the words are much different here, but if there's an element of redemption / atonement going on, like... Because Thorin, when we had last checked in with Thorin, he was throwing Bilbo out, and he was just at, basically his worst point. And after this battle, he fights well in this battle, and he pays for it with his own life to get victory here. So I kind of think, maybe his death atones for all of his past wrongs and his sins. I don't know, what do you kind of think on that?
Well, so to your question, if the words mean the same thing, I think they have similar connotations, but atonement would be if Thorin was actively doing something to repair the damage that he had done before, whereas redemption is he's being elevated to a new status, he's being saved in some way. So personally, I would consider atonement being a little bit more active on his part, and redemption being a little bit more of a product of his situation. Well,
then I think he does atone, because first of all, he fights in battle, and he's wounded, and maybe that kind of clears up his head when, you're looking down... Well, actually, I don't know at all, and we don't know either. But when you're staring death in the face, I feel like many people are pretty clear-headed at that point, and he can see that he has to apologize to Bilbo, and it's luckily he doesn't die before he can see Bilbo, and so maybe it's with talking to Bilbo that he actually makes a full atonement. But he's pretty active in that sense there. But then, maybe just dying redeems him in general, I'd say.
So it's an interesting thing for me. I don't know. I do think Thorin sort of atones for his sins, basically coming into the battle, deciding to fighting honorably. Both in that's representative of his change of heart, and then when he's talking to Bilbo, we can tell he clearly has a different mindset. He's sort of been he no longer has this dragon sickness hanging over him. So that in that way he's come out of it. He snapped out of it, and for me that redeems him a little bit. But what I think is pretty interesting is does his death amplify that? Is his death does he have to die in this situation to fully resolve this plot line?
I was wondering I was wondering about that too, because first of all, again, this is the kids' book. Geez.
Yes, super intense for a children's book.
This is the peak of it, but just this whole battle was it was a pretty messy battle, and then and now you're just gonna throw on us well, how else could Thorin have kind of almost even flipped the switch to get rid of his dragon sickness without throwing himself into battle and ultimately paying the price with his own life to defend his mountain and his people and redeem himself? So that's why I would say, to your answer, I don't see how else he could have really redeemed himself without dying, I guess.
And part of what I'm asking is, it feels to me his death improves his image in so many ways. It automatically gives him martyr status.
Right. Correct.
And I think it's an interesting thing. Throughout history, when people get killed or basically become a martyr, they their actions in life tend to become they take on a different significance. Yeah. So it's a very I feel controversial or interesting topic with a lot of political figures. For example, if they're assassinated, they become martyrs in many ways, and then, like, whether it should or not, or whether people intended to or not, their good deeds tend to outshine their missteps. Yeah. So, like, people kind of automatically assume, like, oh my God, they were, like, a hero among men, or what a phenomenal person. It is the greatest tragedy that they would be taken from us. Whereas if they had stayed around, some people might say, hey, they've got great ideas, or they're a really good leader. And other people might be saying, hey, whatever, they're wrong about this, what have you. So it always feels like a mixed bag to me. Like, in a perverse way, the image of these characters and people benefit from their death, their untimely death.
Yeah, like, I was wondering could Thorin have gotten away with just, like, a major injury, like he couldn't walk anymore and he'd have to be in some sort of ancient wheelchair or something, like, would that have done the same job and he could have lived? Because, then it wouldn't disappoint the kids that he had died, but...
Maybe. Frankly, it actually felt to me like his death, it resolved the chapter faster. Like, it was a surprise. That's true. It was a surprise to me, and I was like, whoa, where'd that come from? And it's a big deal, but it does a very effective job of, like, okay, ties up the Thorin's a wacko plotline really, really quickly. Dane becomes king under the mountain. All of this tension before is completely resolved because reason prevails. If Thorin were to stay alive, you'd have a lot more complexity. Like, even if Thorin's mind was totally changed, he'd have to now kind of walk back on his earlier anger and make amends with these people he defended and yada yada. So just from, like, a narrative standpoint, it's an effective choice to have him die.
Yeah, so let's actually talk about the scene a little bit, because I want to get into it, especially for people that aren't reading along.
Right.
Who we imagine is about 70% of the audience.
Did you say 7%?
70.
No, I'm joking.
All right, so, in Bilbo and Thorin's final exchange, Bilbo's really sad but glad to see that he's shared in the perils, and it's more than anything like he thinks any of his Hobbit people deserve, basically. And Thorin, meanwhile, responds, well, no, more good. There's more good in you, Bilbo, than you know. I mean, you're a child of the West, the kindly West. If more valued food and cheer over gold, the world would be more merrier. That's a very, I don't know. I think that line there, though I didn't directly quote it, is just personal side note. I think that's, like, the most cliche, overused Tolkien quote out there. Because, I mean, It's a good line, but by far not his best and not my favorite, because I don't think food and cheer is the ultimate thing that should be valued. But whatever. Anyways, right. So it's kind of sad that, it is kind of sad that Bilbo, this is how the adventure ends for the character he's been with, Thorin, for the whole adventure of it. But I was taking some notes on Joseph Pierce's Bilbo's Journey book, and so this section was pretty good. So this is just kind of paraphrasing one section of it here, but their conversation kind of summed up this way, in that life is not about the pursuit of creature comforts and taking the path of least resistance. It's about love, which can be defined as willing to lay down our lives for others and leaving the comfort of the Shire, our own space and comfort zone, and embracing the many crosses, sufferings that the adventure life places in our path, and in giving ourselves willingly in the service of others, we grow in virtue, which is the only growth in stature that truly matters. Yeah, if you go back and read Thorin and Bilbo's last conversation, I think that kind of comes out, and that's really, we've seen, like, Christian ideas going on here and everything, but that might be the first explicitly Christian kind of thing going on, in my opinion, in The Hobbit, that is,
You're saying generally the death of Thorin, or specifically, like, him expressing love and that be representative of, like, his, I don't know how to put it, you just described it in better terms, but his expression of love for another is like a, like, completion of his spirit or something like that. Or his growing his stature, as you put it.
Yeah, and first of all, I mean, willingness to lay down our lives for others. I mean, Bilbo is willing to, but he didn't actually end up having to give his life, whereas Thorin did. So this kind of applies to both of them almost.
Right.
But I mean, this is more applicable to Bilbo, that, he didn't spend his life sitting comfortably at home. He went and taken the easiest path ever.
Mm-hmm.
He went out, did this adventure, and I mean, it was about all the, he was ultimately glad for all the pain and suffering that he had to endure on it, as opposed to just getting like treasure at the end, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But he didn't even really need or want much of the treasure at the end of it.
Do we have a direct parallel between Thorin sitting on his pile of gold and then deciding he has to go out and fight in the battle?
Probably. I mean, that's one question. Like, what actually?
Not that he was totally comfortable, but
yeah. I mean, Thorin recognized his duty to defend his mountain if he was a real king there.
So, but to my other question, is this whole scene, you feel like, the first overtly Christian aspect of The Hobbit, or specifically like this declaration of love as an expression of his spirit or something?
I think there's been a bunch of Christian stuff going on, but you can't explicitly point like, hey, that's intentionally, that's a Christian.
You just see parallels.
Yeah, well, no. Tolkien probably intended it as Christian writing kind of stuff, but he purposely underlaid it like, is it not really sure.
Okay.
But I feel like this whole area kind of represents it. And that also goes to another quote that I'm just going to read verbatim here from Joseph Pierce's book. And here is the paradox at the heart of the Christian life. The one who embraces suffering, who dies to himself in order to die for others, is actually happier than the one who shuns suffering and who puts himself above all else. The most miserable people are those who are self-centered, whose friendships are phony, and who value material possessions over spiritual wealth. For in truth, the cross cannot be divided. Everybody carries his cross, and the one who resents it is nailed more painfully to it than the others who embrace it in an act of love. This is the secret of Christ's words that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. If we allow Christ to help us carry our cross, we will find the very sufferings of life a source of joy. If we refuse his help, we will be crushed under the weight of our own sin's gravity.
Interesting.
So, how do we apply that directly here? I feel like that kind of applies to both Thorin and Bilbo in this scene.
You're saying for both Thorin and Bilbo, their willingness to confront the challenges, confront the crosses that they have to bear in their lives is like that ultimately, well, not that it saves them, but ultimately that makes their lives more fulfilling. Yeah.
Basically not living for themselves, giving up, recognizing kind of what's greater than them,
And perhaps both of them had this transformation, Bilbo very slowly at the start of the journey, and Thorin very quickly at the end of it.
Well, Bilbo had it throughout the journey.
Yes,
I think he stepped up,
but in a much more gradual way.
Yeah, Thorin kind of finally flipped the switch, and it's like, how else was he going to redeem himself unless he flipped a switch? Because we had been thinking like, oh, Thorin would have been a good candidate to kill Smaug, but it's like, well, how does he he was in such a bad place and not in a virtuous place to go kill Smaug, but now here he finally is when he jumps into battle. Maybe it was just to defend his own people or defend his own land, but then he in the battle and then the wounds, he's realized basically this what we've been talking about here. Yeah.
Okay. So for all of this glory and memory of epic deeds, do you think we would still have such a happy ending if we had the exact same outcome but there was no treasure? I kind of feel like the abundant wealth from the dragon's lair is sort of lubricating everyone's residual tensions and grievances.
Yeah, a little bit.
It gets back to what I was saying earlier about the good-evil balance, and the dwarves and the elves and the men all came together in the face of the onslaught of goblins. And afterwards, everyone's pretty happy because we've got a ridiculous amount of treasure being passed around to everyone. But to my mind, if there wasn't treasure after that battle ended, people might shake hands and say, good fighting, and then they'd kind of come back around to, well, hold on. I'm mad at you, and you're mad at me, and I owe this, or you owe that.
Well, I think they kind of recognize sacrifices that people made, like Thorin. I mean, Thorin died, and I mean, Bard was the one that placed the Arkenstone on his breast in the grave, to actually give it back to him. And then it is extremely convenient that there's enough treasure to pass around to satisfy everybody. Like, I mean, no, for sure, but I don't know. It was the treasure the end-all be-all to create peace.
Well, actually, to completely disagree with my own argument, you might say that the treasure was the whole source of the conflict in the first place, and that if the treasure weren't there, we wouldn't have a lot of this tension. Like, you wouldn't have, I owe you, you owe me, I'm going to kill you for this treasure, if there wasn't treasure there. Probably people would be willing to fight and then kind of be content with their lot.
Right, and so maybe it's the combination of, since the treasure was there and that was creating tension, now that tension's completely done because the treasure's been passed out. In addition to that, all the bad guys in the area are defeated for years and years to come, which is a good thing too for everybody.
Right.
But they all know that this wasn't permanent victory, that there's other evil stuff out there, and they know what's the real enemy too, and that's going to keep them in line and know who their allies should be. And they became allies as they fight side by side too. Okay.
You setting us up for future action?
I don't know, maybe. I don't know. Bilbo says a bunch of goodbyes here, but I want to get to the one I care about. We can talk about the others too, but the one I care about most is saying goodbye to the dwarves who he's been with for all these months. Yeah. So there's the one part in the book, basically Bilbo's... Well, what does Bilbo do for the treasure? What does he take for his 1/14th share that he doesn't really actually take and doesn't need?
On his deathbed, if you remember, Thorin basically says, I take back everything I said, Bilbo. You can have your treasure after all. So Bilbo says, okay, great. But then he opts out of this treasure, basically. He takes just 2 small chests of silver and gold, which we assume to be some small fraction of what he was offered.
Right. And for practical purposes, how much more could he actually carry? I mean, really.
Sure.
What I also wonder, then again, maybe it'll be mentioned in the last chapter, but I don't actually think. They had buried the the trolls' treasure from chapter 2. I feel like Bilbo should go pick that stuff out. Without question.
That's a good point. Yeah.
He could just take
close
that.
to home for him.
Yeah.
Another question I had while we're on this is a little diversion. Thorin, when he was feeling all pissy, when Bard demanded treasure, Thorin said, or when Bard revealed that he had the Arkenstone, Thorin said, I banish you, Bilbo. Bard, you can take Bilbo and you can have his 14th share of the treasure that he no longer gets. Even though Bard had originally asked for 1/12 of the treasure. And when we hear here in this chapter that Bard receives that 1/14th share of treasure, did he end up getting Bilbo's share?
Yeah, Dane said he honored the agreement that Thorin had made with Bard and back when Bilbo outed that he was the one that gave up the Arkenstone. I feel like we kind of established Bilbo was in the right to be able to take the Arkenstone, but that would be waged as his whole 1/14th.
Right.
Back in the
I guess it just surprised me that since that deal was made on tense terms, kind of comes back to couldn't Bard have asked for more or what have you. Point being, sounds like there's so much treasure, it doesn't really matter.
Right. Yeah. So anyways though, Bilbo's leaving though. And so he's saying goodbye to the 10 dwarves that are still alive here and everything. And so basically, it comes down to this here. So it says, Then the dwarves bowed low before their gate, but words stuck in their throats. Goodbye and good luck wherever you fare, said Balin at last. If ever you visit us again, when our halls are made fair once more, then the feast shall indeed be splendid. If ever you are passing my way, said Bilbo, don't wait to knock. Tea is at 4, but any of you are welcome at any time. Then he turned away. So that's basically that's the farewell to the dwarves there, and that's kind of our final and ultimate balance for the book between the modern Bilbo and the epic heroic dwarves, because in those two things they basically said the exact same thing.
Right, which is fare thee well and you're welcome back anytime.
Yeah, but the dwarves made it all heroic and everything, like when our great halls are made fair and cleaned up and there's a big feast and everything, you'll be the honored guest and everything. Whereas Bilbo, with, again, this is modern maybe for 1930s England, it's, tea's at 4, you're always welcome at my house, I'd love to see you guys, everything. And it's like, not nearly as epic, but it is as heartfelt and as enduring as what the dwarves had just promised him. On a smaller scale.
I mean, I found that line pretty funny because it's very nonchalant. Like there's an element of like humor or sarcasm to it almost, and also it's a little bit humorous, and then it also suggests like it's actually, I feel like, a pretty strong goodbye for Bilbo, because it's like so unflinching that in the face of all this crazy stuff going on and all that he's been through, that he's he can still put his head back down and say, tea's at 4, come by when you want,
Yeah, and it's also ironic because compared to when they first showed up, it's like, you guys aren't really welcome. What the hell are you doing at my house, Right. But yeah, since this is the last time we'll talk about this in The Hobbit, and then if we talk about anything like this in Lord of the Rings, it would take probably a much different form on specific case-by-case stuff. We've been talking about all these old epic heroic virtues, and those really have been superior dignity, loyalty, scrupulosity, and just all-around competence. Whereas the modern values that Bilbo's represented have been frequently respond to a challenge by decisions taken internally, without witness, prompted by duty or conscience rather than for wealth or glory. And this is, that's kind of what we've been roller coasting back and forth, or what's a better word? Like
oscillating.
Yeah, oscillating back and forth between. Yeah. So now they kind of reach the equilibrium because they're both on the same page, saying the same thing here.
Right. Good closure. So with some of these other goodbyes, we've got this slow parade of goodbyes, basically, to all the important characters. Is there a larger significance here? Felt to me a little bit like, I mean, I know it's chronological, like, first the dwarves, then the Elven King, then Bjorn. But at least right now, it seems a little bit like we're going in order of the admiration Bilbo had for them, or their places.
I mean, maybe that could somehow line up, but I think it's just spatial, obviously.
Okay.
I don't think he has more admiration for the Elven King than the 10 dwarves who are alive who he spent months with traveling with.
That's true, although I feel like throughout this whole chapter, we got a few little hints, like Bilbo was secretly enamored with the Elven King, or, finally revealed that he had a ton of respect for the king.
Well, when Bilbo was banished from Thorin's camp, he said, I guess I'm going to join the elves, because, the dwarves that I know are all lustfully dragon sick,
right.
Crazy for gold. So, I mean, by default, I guess I'll go with them, but individually, I'm sure he loves the dwarves that he got to know way more. I mean, how could he not?
That's fair. Anything special about this gift that he gives to the Elven King?
I thought it was just kind of funny.
He gives him a necklace, right?
Right. Let me see. Did I write a note about that?
It's a necklace that Dane had given Bilbo when they said their goodbye. Bilbo gives it to the Elven King. The Elven King, says, "What of this? Why are you giving me a gift?" Bilbo says, basically, I was a thief in your palace. I had your bread and wine. Thank you for everything. And the Elven King is like, oh, well, thank you so much. You're a friend of the elves, and we'll remember this forever. Great work, Bilbo. Like, it was a little bit funny. I thought like it was a casual, maybe not casual, but a good deed on Bilbo's part, and at the very least being polite. And then the Elven King is like, oh, well, now that you mention it, we'll make a lifetime commitment to make sure we got you back. Smart trade, I would say.
Yeah, I thought it was funny too. I don't know much more than that, but I thought all the endings were good. I thought it was kind of interesting when they were talking about walking back with Gandalf and Bjorn that, yeah, there was a bunch of dangers along the way, but, you know, you completely got the sense from the couple sentences they wrote that, like, well, they weren't in real danger because Gandalf and Bjorn were there. I mean,
right.
Those are good protectors, so it's like, well, you don't even have to feel real danger. It's just the typical danger of being out in the wilderness.
Right. I was a little bit surprised, though, or I guess I should say, it's hard to get a sense of the story when that, you know, that comprises two sentences, when we had like 2/3 of the book as this lengthy journey and all of the trials and tribulations along the way.
Yeah, but they had said, I mean, the goblins were cleared out, and they didn't go through.
Fair.
They didn't go through the dangerous forest.
It's fair. It makes sense. It's just, I thought it was. It felt a little bit rushed to me.
Well, of course, we addressed that the whole last chapters of this book are rushed.
Fair.
Anyways, though, I think this kind of brings up our next hero step.
I can be your hero, baby. There goes my hero. Watch him as he goes. I'm a hero. Larger than life.
What is it?
All right, so this step is the rescue from without. All right, so this one.
Hold on, since before you hit me with your definition, let me take a stab at what this one is.
Okay.
Rescue from without.
Wait, I gave you the notes.
I'm not looking at them. I'm not reading them.
Okay.
Just going off the name, which feels a little bit self-explanatory to me. This is going to be someone comes in from outside the story, or maybe outside the character's life, and saves them from something.
Pretty good, Clifford. All right, yeah, because yeah, you're right, but I found like kind of what I thought were two differing definitions. So basically, I read what's in the book, the meaty sentences without getting too deep into whatever examples he's given in this book, and then I'll check
the book being you're talking about being the hero's journey.
Yeah, right. and then I'll check. I'll just type hero's journey in Google, and then I'll go to the first couple sites and just see what they have for examples. Usually, I'm looking for examples, and then I'll also read their descriptions. But this one, there's a couple sites that didn't match up. Their descriptions didn't really match up with what the book was. Mm-hmm. So, anyways, this is what I got from. Is this the book? Yeah. Okay. So this is from the book. This is the book's definition. The hero may have to be brought back from his supernatural adventure by assistance from without. That is, the world may have to come and get him. Let's see. Wikipedia kind of says something similar, where just as the hero may need guides and assistants to set out on the quest, often he must have a powerful guide and rescuers to bring him back to everyday life, especially if the person has been wounded or weakened by the experience. Now, then there was another site that I was looking at, and it says, the hero is rescued from a final plight from an unexpected source. The rescuer may be someone who had previously abandoned the hero, or even someone who the hero does not know. In mythic stories, the intervention may come from a god. Okay. So that seems like there's like kind of two paths there. Like, you know, they're still in like the ultimate danger, like, you know, maybe ultimate boon kind of stages, like the climax of the story, and they need help getting rescued from the climax. And then one of the definitions is more like, well, climax has already happened. We just got to get the character back to real life. You know, those don't seem to quite line up with me.
Fair.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
But either way, in The Hobbit, no worries. We achieved both of those. whichever definition you want to go by, Bilbo's going to hit both. But first, let's do some examples. So, if we're doing the, the climax hasn't quite come and the hero needs outside help, for our Star Wars example, I think this is when, so there's two examples. So, it's more clear, actually, in New Hope, if you just take that movie as just a single hero's journey by itself. So, like, Episode 4, just the original one. When Han Solo comes out of nowhere and shoots Vader so that Luke's not being tailed by him and he can just get a clear shot off at the Death Star to blow it up. Like, that's like, pretty spitting image what this is. In Episode 6, it's probably when, even though this is kind of out of order from the other steps that we've already talked about, it might be when Vader randomly, or no, not randomly, but surprisingly grabs the Emperor and throws him off the bridge to save Luke, because Luke is dying. Right. And then, Vader is like, oh, this is my son, I feel so bad, and then I throw him off. So, but if we're going by, bringing the climax has already happened and we're bringing the character back into kind of just reality. Maybe where is this explicitly clear in Star Wars, by the end of Episode 6, I don't know. Luke's kind of, maybe just when Luke comes back and he's hanging out with Leia and Han and Lando and Chewie, and they're just all pumped and happy, and I don't know, maybe you can kind of go back to normal from there. Of course, he's a different person, which is in a couple of later steps, but I mean, he's back with his friends and everything. The adventure's over at that point, I'd say, because they're all celebrating, maybe.
Yeah, that seems like more of a stretch to me.
Well, okay. Well, anyways, I got other examples here. So Indiana Jones, this goes off of the, random source coming to save the day at the end, or saving at the climax, This would probably have to be in the first Indiana Jones when he's all tied up against the post and the Nazis are going to open the Ark of the Covenant because they're crazy. And then all of a sudden out of the Ark comes like the supernatural forces and it melts all their faces. That would, I think...
Remind me, how does Indiana Jones get protected from that?
He does not look at it. He closes his eyes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Kind of simple, but then again, I don't know. Kind of smart on his part because nobody else did it. All the Nazis didn't do it. Stupid. Yeah. So I mean, if we're going with like the outside force comes in to save the day, but at the climax of the story as opposed to getting him out, right? That one hits like the saving the day climax one like completely. I'd say. Same with the... Well, actually, no. Forget that one. Anyways, though, the best example of this, where it hits both of those at the same time, where, like, it's the climax of the story, but then also we're returning to normal life. Right. We shall have to go to Oz.
To Oz? To Oz. We're out to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Here he is, the Wizard of Wiz, if ever a wiz there was. If ever a wiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does. We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
Oh man, I love that jingle, don't you?
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. Couple of best parts of that one.
Oh, let's play the sucker again.
You're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. So kind he is, a wizard of Wiz, if ever a wiz there was. If ever a wiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does. You're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
Oh, fun stuff. All right. Well, yeah, so I think this one actually completely exemplifies it. Here, Dorothy, they get to the climax of the movie, and the whole thing was just like, I want to get back to Kansas the whole time, And so then she gets to the wizard, and the wizard's a fraud or whatever, but then what? It's Glinda that's just like, oh, I can help you get home. Now that you've done this grand adventure and we're at the climax of the story, I can send you home. So this is the guide kind of phase again, too. Because those definitions we're talking about some sort of guide. And so then she's just like, well, all you have to do is
Yes, I'm ready now. Then close your eyes and tap your heels together 3 times. And think to yourself, there's no place like home. There's no place like home.
There's no place like home.
And then she made it home. Just like that, you know? So I feel like that encompasses absolutely everything about this step.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so based on your examples, I'm not positive I know which part of the chapter you're talking about.
All right, well, so if we're talking about like that climax part, like we need some outside force to come in and help save the day at the end at the climax.
Mm-hmm.
That goes back to our catastrophe talk with the Eagles and Bjorn coming in. I think that's where it happened. But then if we're talking about like we need something else to like, you know, if we like refuse to call and we want to stay in this blissful state of like winning or whatnot, we need somebody to pull us out. That comes with and bring us back to reality. I feel like that's just the whole journey of Gandalf and Bjorn walking Bilbo home, and this is where we hit it.
Okay,
here.
that is the rescue. That is literally pulling him out of this world of battle and treasure and everything back into his world.
Yeah, and you know, like there's the guide at the beginning, and now there's the guide at the end, and of course supernatural. And I mean Gandalf, for all intents and purposes, is kind of that supernatural power. Whether he is or isn't.
That makes a lot of sense to me in general. Like you said, Gandalf is a consistent guide, both in terms of the hero steps and just in general. And I could also see it where we're looking at the broader time scale. Maybe we even have to rope in the next chapter that we haven't gotten to yet. But Gandalf comes back to the story. He reappears after he's been gone for a while, and that coincides with the climax of the story of Bilbo facilitating the basic, or Bilbo stealing the Arkenstone, facilitating this deal between Bard and Thorin. Gandalf not instigating but helping organize the battle against the goblins, and then also returning Bilbo from the world of the Lonely Mountain to the world of the Shire. I know that gets a little bit loose, but that is pretty clear, like, to me, that Gandalf is the supernatural guide in that instance.
Right. I mean, I just think, you know, you can debate specifics of it. I mean, we can, again, even debate longer about which definition of this it really is, because there are kind of two going on. Like, is it the climax part, or is it, like, dragging you back after the climax has already happened? But either way, I think it just happens over the course of the previous chapter and then this chapter as well. One last thing I would note with that, too, is when they're climbing over at the top of the Misty Mountains, it's noted that Bilbo kind of feels that the Tookish side of him, which is the adventurous side, is getting pretty tired, and then the slightly lazy or comfortable Baggins side is kind of coming back to him. So he's kind of ready for the adventure to be over and end a little bit.
So even within his own psyche, he's slowly returning to his previous state.
Yeah, but again, that probably happens because he's had all the help from the guide guiding him back, and everything, like all the most dangerous stuff has already been defeated, and it's just like it's been a real wind down for the whole walk home.
He's coming down from his adrenaline rush.
Yeah,
that lasted
months,
9 months.
Yeah. All right, Clifford, how you been?
Been good. How about yourself, Patrick?
All right. I was sick over the weekend, but it was still fun. It was a good time.
Sorry to hear that.
How about you?
I was in Mexico City over the weekend, which was awesome.
Ooh, exotic.
No, it is a super cool place if anyone's considering going.
Yeah, nice.
Big and
what was the highlight?
Big and busy, but really neat. Highlight: we went to go see the pyramids outside the city at one of the archaeological sites yesterday, which is pretty awesome. I mean, it's like giant pyramids.
Cool. All right. Let's see. I got a review here to read.
Cool.
There's actually multiple to choose from, but since we have more episodes to come than reviews so far, both people will probably eventually win. Okay, so this one's courtesy of B-Tino7. That might be some sort of relative. Great podcast, highly recommended. 5 stars. This podcast has great insights. The dynamics between Pat and Clifford, coupled with some of the witty banter, makes this fun to listen to. Good for the average reader to the biggest LOTR fans. 3 exclamation points.
Sweet.
Nice job. B-Tino7, send me an email to talkingtokenpodcast@gmail.com and I'll with your address and I'll send you a beer koozie and letter. I've been accompanying letters signing both me and Clifford's names in there.
Forging my name.
So I practice your signature not your signature. I practice my signature quite a lot, so it looks very nice, and I have a good pen here that I use.
And then you write mine with your left hand backwards, upside down.
Correct. Yeah.
Greatly appreciated, Patrick.
Yeah. Yeah, what else? Well, tomorrow's Ash Wednesday. You ready for lunch?
I am. How about yourself?
Yeah, just about, I think. Actually, yeah, I kind of am ready. You know, we weren't really on top of it, but I think I don't think we should do this now, but next year we should think of something to do together and encourage the fans to do it with us.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know, unless you got something off the top of your head right now. Yeah, the main thing I think I'm going to try to do is not keep my phone in my pocket.
What are you going to do instead?
Well, I'll just carry it in like a backpack or something and just check it like 2 or 3 times a day. Like,
that's pretty smart.
At like meals, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, because it's not functional in 2019 to just give it up completely.
No,
that's counterproductive.
Right.
But to stop like just pulling it out to check, you know, the news. Or
yeah,
something.
I'm on board with that. It's a total twitch of mine, and I probably just about everybody else's in our generation to, you know, any split second that there's like a wait for something. So,
right. Yeah.
Well, cool.
Yeah. Nice. Anything else for this? Because we could probably just end it here. I think this one was also long again. We're gonna need some short episodes to balance this out.
Do they get any shorter going forwards?
They didn't get long.
Okay.
So, like, I don't know. I haven't finished completely editing 18, but it doesn't seem like it's getting worse. Like 16 for the shortest chapter of the book. Well, that's the whole problem with our whole second half is all of them have gotten longer
As the chapters
have gotten shorter. With the shortest chapter being our longest recording so far.
Man.
But that was also because I played a bunch of Sound of Music.
Nice.
Yeah. So, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Then let's leave it there.
Thanks, Shell.
Oh, let's play the sucker again.
You're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. To find he is a wizard, a whiz, if ever a whiz there was. If ever a whiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does. You're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.